Chase Claypool's talking about being a top 3 wide receiver, but what did he actually say? We'll go over that and give you some more perspective as to how he can become a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL. I'm Chris Carter, the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. And if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes when we have breaking news updates, and sometimes we just want to have some extra fun. So, As y'all might have guessed, as I said, I was on a little bit of a vacation. I was at a wedding. I'm back now. And no sooner than I get back does the I Am Athlete podcast episode release that talked to Chase Claypool. Now, if you missed all of this, let me catch you up real quick. Basically, the I Am Athlete podcast is a mix. You have Brandon Marshall, former NFL wide receiver, Pac-Man Jones, cornerback for the Bengals, and LaShawn McCoy, former running back for the Eagles and a few other teams in the NFL. All of them come together and they talk to an athlete and they just have a free conversation. This time it was Chase Claypool. And in this conversation, one of the biggest quotes that's being pulled out is Chase Claypool saying, "I'm a top 3 wide receiver." Now, before we get into all of that, you should understand the context of how it was said. But I do want to go into what all this means and where I see Chase Claypool's headspace being. Now, if you're a person who's looking over Chase Claypool's numbers, you're probably sitting there like, well, he didn't exactly have a great second year. But Chase Claypool would tell you, hey, I felt like I was becoming a better player, just wasn't in as many of the good positions. He talked about how the Steelers didn't give him as many red zone shots or as many opportunities or put him in situations where the play wasn't really going to be designed to go in certain situations. So there was a little bit of that. But where he was talking about was he feels that if he does the work that he knows that he should, he's going to be a top 5 or a top 3 wide receiver. And that's, if you take the exact quote as it is and put it on a blog or a website or a piece of paper, it looks, oh yeah, I'm top 3 right now. That's not at all what he was saying. And in fact, if you want, again, he's talking about he can get there, he can be there, and he wants to be there. And in fact, the thing is him thinking this way isn't new. I told you all he was thinking this way during minicamp because he told me that in a one-on-one conversation that not only we talked about here, I wrote about it on SteelersNow.com, and Steelers.com even posted our full interview. Here's just a clip of him talking about how him being in the slot was going to be better for him, and also talking about he wants to be a top 3 receiver in the NFL. This is Chase Claypool from minicamp just a few weeks ago.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like when you had a lot of your bigger plays in your rookie season, especially against the Eagles, I felt like you were doing a lot more slot play that year because of availability. Is that true?
Yeah, that's why, based off how things worked out, I couldn't be in the slot as much as I wanted to, or as much as they wanted me to be in the slot. So, I just take it when I could get it. But now they're really moving me all around. So it's outside, slot, number 3, and running back too.
Last question for me. No, sorry, I'm asking a lot.
You're good.
Is there a number that you've set for yourself, receptions, yards, touchdowns that you want out of yourself this year that you're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just aiming to be, top 3 receiver. So, that's my goals.
In the league?
Yeah, that's my goal. So,
all right.
Anyone can hate on it if they want.
Exactly. So you see there right there. He's just, hey, my goal for myself is top 3. He's not saying he is top 3. He's saying, and again, if you go back to the I Am Athlete podcast episode, which was a great episode, there was a lot of really good perspective pulled out from those guys of Chase Claypool. I thought it was a nice free-flowing discussion. So do go check out that episode. You can get that just like you get this podcast anywhere. But when you're hearing Chase Claypool talking about it, he's talking about how, hey, I see this. I see this for myself. I'm different. I'm 6'2". I run a 4.42. I have the size. I have the speed. I have the playmaking ability. I have the strength. We've seen him block very well. We've seen him run through things very well. There are things that he can do better, and there's things that he needs to work on. And this is what I want to focus on for this episode: is what he does need to work on to be a top 3 wide receiver. Because I'm the first one to tell you that's a lofty goal. 1, there's a lot of wide receivers. 2, there's a lot of very talented wide receivers. 3, there's a lot of very talented wide receivers who are extremely polished in their game. And I think that's been the biggest problem of Chase Claypool's game, is that he's not polished yet. He has to get a little bit more polish for us to start talking about him being in that conversation. Heck, he's not the best receiver on his team yet. That's still Deontay Johnson. And I'm telling you right now, if he ain't careful, George Pickens could have a big rookie season, and we're talking about who is the number 3 wide receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But to get there, Chase Claypool knows he has to do some work, and I think that it's important to look at what he does need to do to get to that point. So, first point here, he does need to, and I'm going to give you my 3 things here that he needs to do to become that top 3 wide receiver that he wants to be. Even if he doesn't officially, become a top 3 wide receiver in yards or touchdowns, being in that conversation with being one of the elite wide receivers. First and foremost, he has to catch the ball away from his body. He has to improve his hands. He has to be more reliable in those situations. Now, thing is, he recognizes that. And then earlier in that interview, we talked about it. And he told me straight up, he's like, hey, I went and I've had a jugs machine in my backyard all off season. I've been working on this. This is something that I've absolutely, focused on. He talked about how he catches a couple hundred of passes each day from a machine called a Monarch, which is like a super jugs machine. Now, if you're if you never played football and you're wondering, Chris, what is a jugs machine? Imagine a machine where you put a football in it and it just rockets a pass out like it rockets a ball like it's a pass. So you're catching a high velocity football. Well, a Monarch is a more extreme version of the jugs machine, so that you're catching it like a jugs machine. You'll catch it like it's from a good college quarterback or someone that has a decent arm. A Monarch, as I understand it, is the kind of machine that you catch it from, like Ben Roethlisberger in his prime throwing you the ball. So it's like there's fire coming off of it when it comes out the Monarch. So that's the thing. He's been working on that. We saw how last year Deontay Johnson worked on improving his hands. He became a better wide receiver. In fact, he finished in the top 10 in yards, top 6 in receptions, and top 6 in first downs converted by wide receivers last year. So absolutely, Chase Claypool can do the things to get there. But the first and foremost thing, with his size and with his speed, you need to be able to go up and get the football and win those contested catch battles. And it starts with limiting the drop. That is the number one thing. If he does that, I'm not saying that alone makes him top 3 or top 5 or anything, but it will put him to the front of the line. It'll put him in a conversation when Steelers fans say he does these things, does that. He's a much better 50-50 ball catcher. If he's much more reliable in his hands, that'll start putting us in the conversation. Well, wait a second. Who is the Steelers' number 1 wide receiver? Because right now, it's definitely Deontay Johnson. There's no doubt in my mind. He has the separation skills. He's improved his hands. He has a year on Claypool, so he's gone through a few bit more of these wars. But now's the time to see how does Chase Claypool take his year 3, because the way Deontay Johnson did it really helped himself improve his game, even though he did fall off at the end of the year a little bit. He was definitely a better wide receiver than he was in the year 2. That's what Chase Claypool wants to do with his year 3. There's 2 more things I want to touch on that Chase Claypool has to be able to do better to become the receiver that he wants to be. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, as well as a few other things with the wide receiver position and others. But first, we got to talk to you guys about BlueNile.com. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind. Looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing? Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7. They're available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings, so be sure to use that promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace when you visit BlueNile.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I want to talk more about Chase Claypool. I say because I got two more things that if he does these two things, this will put him into that conversation. Again, not guaranteeing he becomes top 3, but then everyone will talk about Chase Claypool differently this year. Now, if you heard Chase Claypool again during the I Am Athlete podcast, he talked a lot about he talked a lot about when it came to the TikToks and the stuff from 2020 that everyone was discussing. That wasn't, that's something that he's not thinking about as much, even though he does talk about how he makes money for TikTok and how having his social media presence got him a contract with Jordan, and that became one of his sponsors, and that was a great deal that he got for him. So there are reasons for athletes to do that off the field, but on the field, he does need to focus on some things. I talked about his hands, but I truly think, and again, you listen to the conversation that I was having with Chase Claypool, they want to use him in the slot more. He wants to be in the slot more. I truly think that a big part of the reason why he wasn't in the slot last year was because they felt that him and Deontay Johnson were better weapons outside than James Washington last year, and that Ray McCloud in the slot was a better situation than James Washington outside, while Chase Claypool is inside in the slot than, vice versa. So I truly think that was a situational development there. But I think a part of what Chase Claypool has to do, he has to get cleaner off his releases. And I saw this in his rookie season when guys got up on him, and he's a big physical dude. He's got those long arms. This is why he thinks he can be a top 3 wide receiver. And I don't think he's crazy for thinking this. You have to have this mentality if you're going to be a star player in the NFL. If you're going to be a player in the NFL, you have to have confidence that you can be one of the best out there. But one of the things that Chase Claypool didn't do well of, I thought, is rookie, and this is something that I saw him improve on, was beating the jam, having better releases, cleaner releases. That was one thing that Antonio Brown was the best that I've ever seen, was getting out of his break, or getting out of his off the ball. And when people try to jam him, they would try to get physical with him. They try to finesse him. They try to pin him to the sideline. More often than not than any other receiver I've ever watched play the game of football, he would find a way to get loose. And that's what made Antonio Brown amazing at the start of a play. And the thing was that he completed it by having amazing hands, having great route running skills in the middle of the route, and then at the back end of the route, and still having great separation and being an amazing play. He did all the things that you asked of him as a wide receiver. Chase Claypool has tools to get there. But he has to improve those hands on those jams. He has to find a way to make sure, hey, don't let a guy get up in your chest. Make sure that you're coming out, and have quick feet. Have a balance that when you're coming out. I've seen him be sharp at times. He has to be more consistent with how sharp he is. And if you understand what I'm talking about with quick feet, when you're coming out of your stance, you don't want the defender to know, hey, I'm going to the inside, or hey, I'm going to the outside. You want to put the cornerback in front of you, especially when you're in the slot, on a complete watch of, okay, I don't know if this guy's going to break left or right. I don't know if he's going to try to blow past me. I don't know if he's going to try to kind of scare me off and then come back to the quarterback and stay beneath me, but I have to be ready at all times. And when you force a cornerback to be that mindful of so many different directions, that gives you the advantage to kind of set the tone and say, hey, I could fake this way, but go that way. And he can't predict where I'm going. But a lot of that is based off of body language. It's based off of foot placement, sharp foot placement, consistent foot placement. So there's no tell that you give away. Like, how, when poker players talk about tells, where if you see someone like scratch their eyebrow, that, hey, that's their hand. There's certain tells that people had. Antonio Brown used to have a tell where he would tighten his gloves when he was the key playmaker. And people used to talk about, oh, that was the key. And by the second year that someone talked about that, he did it every play, so that you just didn't know if it was going to be him. But for Chase Claypool, again, I think the second base thing is he has to improve those release skills. He has to be clean consistently. 9 out of every 10 snaps, he needs to be beating the man off the line of scrimmage. He needs to be able to get loose so that the start of his route is not infringed. Because also the part of this is timing. You're not working with Ben Roethlisberger anymore. You're working with a bunch of younger quarterbacks who are still figuring their way into the NFL. Kenny Pickett, literally, Mitch Trubisky. He's had some experience. Started 50 games. Mason Rudolph 10 games. These are all guys that are working their way, and you're developing a new rapport with all of them except Mason. And even with Mason, it was limited at times. So when you're cleaning your release, the timing that you work on in practice of when to release the ball, when to throw, what part of the field to throw the ball to, because of when you're in your route, all of that it gets boosted and becomes more consistent when you are cleaning your release. Again, that's such a huge part of being able to do this. The third big thing that I think if Chase Claypool can be this guy for the Steelers and be a top 3 NFL wide receiver, is when he's out there and when he does have the ball in his hands, he has to use his athleticism to the max. I thought he did this very well as a rookie, but last year I felt like there were times that he was diving and he was leaving his feet too much, and he was not getting a chance to use his run after the catch ability. This guy is fast. He's big. He's strong. When he picks up his momentum, he is very tough to stop unless he stops himself. And it was a running joke about Chase Claypool all last season of, all he does is fall down and this stuff. And it was true. I'm saying that mockingly, but it was a very fair criticism, and not just very accurate criticism of him. Was he would often leave his feet, fall to the ground, and that was it. He has to keep his feet so that he can maximize his athleticism to be able to take people on, force defenses to say, hey, if the ball gets in that dude's hand and we don't bring him down right away and he picks up speed, he becomes a lot tougher to stop. And if he hits one seam, he's dangerous. We've seen Chase Claypool's speed hurt teams this way. We've seen his size hurt teams this way. Now it's just up to the Steelers to getting back to letting him do that. And again, if what we're hearing from him is to be believed, if what's being said, if he's actually going to be in the slot, I think that's a big part of it. But it won't matter where he lines up if he doesn't do those 3 things. 1, make sure the catches aren't a problem. Become a reliable 50-50 ball guy. Do all the things to have elite hands, because it won't matter all this other stuff. You can't catch the ball if you can't pull it in, and especially in big situations, you're not going to be reliable enough to be a top 3 receiver on your own team. But I think he can get there. He knows he's catching. He said he's catching a couple hundred passes a day. If he's doing that, I think he'll get there. Again, 2, release. Got to get off the ball clean. Got to make sure he's not getting jammed. Got to make sure teams can't get up in his chest and disrupt his timing so that he can develop that rapport with his younger quarterbacks. And he has to make sure that he's maximizing his run after the catch ability with his athleticism, making himself a tough player to bring down. He does those 3 things. I think we're talking about a different Chase Claypool. And if you remember, if you were a long-time Locked On Steelers listener, back before we even had a YouTube page, you remember I used to do the Mapletron sound effect. I got to figure out how to make that work on video. That's why I haven't done it in over a year. But in the 2020 season, when he was a rookie, everyone called him Mapletron. And I made like a little sound effect that we would do every time he would have a huge game. And we would say that, just use that sound effect instead of saying his name as a funny little gimmick that we did. But point being, that was something that we did then. He wasn't that big of that big playmaker last year. He had the yards, but he didn't have the touchdowns. He does all those things. The red zone targets will come. The slot targets will come. The big play opportunities will come, and he will reap the benefits, because I think if that guy with his athleticism starts hitting his top speed and getting through defenses, he'll get some more of those touchdowns and big plays, and then everyone's going to be talking differently about Chase Claypool. But again, there's going to be a lot of competition for those passes, because Deontay Johnson's going to be out there. George Pickens looks really good, man. Pat Freiermuth is looking really tough. I talked last week about how Zach Gentry is looking like the Steelers are going to want to use more 12 personnel packages to get both tight ends on the field. And oh, by the way, Najee Harris wants to catch some passes too. So it might be a situation where Chase Claypool, your biggest thing in your way, on top of your own skills being in the way, it's going to be your teammates as you share the ball around, and depending on how evenly distributed the football gets in the Steelers offense. But again, I think that's why a lot of people are excited about the Steelers offense in Pittsburgh, and as far as where the team could go. If you listen outside, people are talking about, oh, the Steelers are the cheapest offense in the NFL. The highest paid player on the offense right now officially is Derek Watt. So they can't be any good. There's a lot of young talent on this offense, y'all. And Chase Claypool, if he can take the steps that he sees for himself, that's just one of the many steps that I think the Steelers taking this year could actually make them a serious problem on the offensive side of the ball. They still got work to do on defense to get back to being elite on defense the way they were for the past few years before 2021. But part of that is going to involve one specific position, a position that was asked to me about on our hotline for the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll get to that question from one of our loyal listeners and viewers in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Stanley Cup Finals, which are underway. The NBA Finals are done. The Warriors are the champs. If you were smart, you bet with me and you made money on the Warriors win it all. But also, Major League Baseball is well underway. And hey, get it in while you can with the Stanley Cup Finals, y'all. It's gonna be time to make some money there, because once that's out, you know it's WNBA season and it's baseball season, and everyone's just gonna be thirsting for football. So Bet Online. Go there now. It's your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've done a lot of talking about the receivers and Chase Claypool, so I'm going to get to one of the questions. We have a lot of questions that have been stacking up in our hotline. Again, I do apologize for not getting to as many. The last 3 episodes we've seen from Monday, Friday, Thursday, and even Wednesday, really, all those episodes were pre-recorded well in advance because I knew I would not be available from Thursday until late Monday night when I'm recording this, going for the Tuesday episode. So I do apologize for not getting to a lot of you guys' calls. We're going to be working those into the shows as best as we can. This call, though, comes from a loyal listener, Daryl Baxter of New Brunswick, New Jersey, asking about one of the positions that might be getting overlooked as far as where the Steelers could spend with some of the new cap space available. Here's Daryl.
Hello, Chris. My name is Daryl Baxter. I'm calling from New Brunswick, New Jersey. I've been hearing on your show and others recently the question about what Pittsburgh should do with the $20 million in salary cap that they have available. And I've heard lots of suggestions about a defensive lineman to replace Tuitt, or a cornerback one, because they say that they don't trust the guys we have, I guess. A backup for Najee, some depth at offensive line. But I hear no one asking the question about middle linebacker. Can you tell me 2 middle linebackers that you are confident are ready to start? If we don't have 2 middle linebackers that we are confident in, and a backup in case one of those guys goes down, it seems like middle linebacker might need to be where we need to spend that $20 million. Let me know what you think. Thanks.
Thanks for your question, Daryl. And if you want to hear your question on the show, all you got to do is do what he did. Call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and a brief message telling me or asking me what your question is about your Pittsburgh Steelers or anything in the NFL. We bring questions. If you're international, you can't call that number. Just email an MP3 file with your name and where you're from and telling me about your question. Again, please keep these all under a minute, but you can email LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Again, that's LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. So, to answer your question, Daryl, why aren't people talking about the inside linebacker position? Well, it's because there's some excitement there, and that's because Devin Bush is going to be a starter this year, and they signed Myles Jack in free agency, which was a prediction on this show that we thought would happen long in advance, the one before Myles Jack was even released by the Jaguars. So there's not a rush to get to that position, but I do agree with you. It's not solidified that inside linebacker is just going to work out. It's, Devin Bush, I believe, and I've said even when he was struggling last year, I've said that guy just needs time. He's going to get his feet back under it. But when he does, you're gonna be sorry that you ever doubted him, because I think he could be a phenomenal linebacker for the Steelers and what they ask of their linebackers to go sideline to sideline. I've liked Myles Jack as a player for years. I've always thought he is a heady player. I've always thought he was a good athlete. I've thought he's been a good role player who can become a playmaker for the defense of the Jaguars. I still remember, if the referees call it the right way, when I think it was a fumble recovery that he took on the Patriots, and he would have walked all the way back for an end zone in the AFC Championship game. If they had called that correctly, the Jaguars would have went to that Super Bowl that year and might have even won that year. But point being, they do have two guys. But I feel you, Daryl, with your question, because the first year for Myles Jack being on the team, Devin Bush coming off a really rough season, which was already coming off another injury. So there's no guarantees there. Behind them, you have Robert Spillane, Buddy Johnson, Ulysses Gilbert III. Not the greatest lineup if you're thinking about it. Now, Robert Spillane, I think, is good for his role as far as hug blitzing and covering running backs out of the backfield, playing like really shallow zones if you're going to help in coverage, but very limiting. So if the Steelers are going to use some of their cap space, by the way, there was about approximately, I think, $2 million freed up in cap space by Minkah Fitzpatrick's contract, which we talked about last week a little bit. But the more details have come out about that. And now I believe the Steelers are close to $23 million in cap space. So they got money to spend right now. There aren't many, to answer Darius' question, if you were to look at guys out there aren't many linebackers that are just floating around that would fit what the Steelers want to do by going and signing free agency. Now, some people might go and they might say, like, oh, what about this guy, or what about that guy? Like Malcolm Smith, or not even Malcolm Smith, Jamie Collins. He's still floating out there. He has a lot of experience from being with the Patriots. Trying to go to KJ Wright. He's been a big guy. All those guys. If you see a guy who's 32, 33 years old, cross him off your list. Dante Hightower is another one of them. Hightower 5 years ago, Steelers would have been like, okay. In fact, they were talking to him at one point, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it was that was right before the Patriots re-signed him to a bigger contract. But when it comes to the linebacker position, when it comes to any position in free agency, the Steelers typically get guys who are as close to possible as coming off of their first contract in the NFL. They want to get you when if you're older, their preferred age range usually 27, 28 years old. There's only a few linebackers who really fit that role and have had, I think, in my opinion, decent starting experience in the NFL. The thing is that it may wind you right back up where you were last year. Here are the three names: Jalen Smith, Quan Alexander, and Joe Schobert. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a second, those two other guys were second-round picks, right? Jalen Smith, Quan Alexander. Why not go with those, Chris? Well, they're both been hurt. Jalen Smith, one, had the terrible injury in his bowl game before he was supposed to be, a top first-round draft pick his year. Then he goes to the Cowboys, and he has a good resurrection of his career. He becomes a consistent starter from 2018 to 2020. But then he bounced around the league, was with the Cowboys, then the Packers, then the Giants last year, and now he's still a free agent. He only played 9 games or something like that last year, or 10 games, excuse me. So he at 27 years old, that's tough. That's tough. It's tough to think, oh, hey, you're just gonna plug him in. He's gonna be fine. You want a healthy person who's gonna be able to play. Who's going to be able to play for you. The other name there, Quan Alexander, similar situation. A guy who's 28 years old. He's had several injuries. He's bounced around between the Saints and the 49ers, still a free agent, had a torn pec recently. I think he's played 12 seasons in each of his last 2 years, or 12 games, in each of his last 2 years. So this is a guy that hasn't been playing complete seasons recently. He's had some serious injuries. There's questions there. And whoever you sign at this linebacker spot you're signing to be your emergency linebacker, your third linebacker in the rotation that you're like, okay, you're going in if Myles Jack or Devin Bush get hurt or aren't playing really well, and we just need to change the pace there. Don't forget also Marcus Allen will be in that mix. I apologize to Marcus Allen if he watches this shout. I doubt he does, Chico, but if you do, we apologize. That was my fault for not including you in that linebacker mix. I still think of you as a safety at times. But that last name, Joe Schobert, I know Steelers fans might be thinking, what did he do for the Steelers last year? He'd be a veteran body who you could plug in emergency situations rather than considering him as a consistent starter. Joe Schobert was an emergency pickup last year because the Steelers thought, hey, maybe Devin Bush will be great. Maybe he'll jump back. He'll get back into form, and maybe Robert Spillane will grow into a better linebacker. Devin Bush was showing that he still had ways to go in his recovery. Robert Spillane wasn't that good. And so they needed to go trade for a linebacker. They went and traded for him, got him for a 5th-round pick, I believe. It's been a while. It was actually one of my first big YouTube videos talking about that. But point being, Joe Schobert came in and just held the water. He wasn't doing anything special, but there were times he did come up in a big situation. He stripped, I think it was Jarvis Landry in the Browns game, the Browns away game in Cleveland, when the Steelers pulled off a big 15-10 win, I believe it was. He stripped him in the red zone even for a huge play to make that happen. He also had an interception, I believe, against the Titans. It was in another close game, 2 AFC games that helped get the Steelers to the playoffs. And again, he wasn't the catalyst, but he was kind of just there. And he's like, hey, I'm going to do my job as best as I can. That's all you're looking for a backup linebacker in this situation. If you're signing one of these free agents, you're not coming in to take Devin Bush's job or take Myles Jack's job unless, miraculously that somehow happens. You're bringing them in case, this is an emergency. Break glass in case of emergency. You're not bringing in Joe Schobert, Quan Alexander, or Jalen Smith in just to take over your team. You're bringing them in and say, hey, things go bad, we'll need you out there. And also to help on special teams, which is what also the backup linebackers do. I don't anticipate the Steelers to make a move on this until they get guys to camp, see how physical guys get in the hole, backs on backers, see how those things are going. If things are flowing well, maybe they don't make a move. But if they see some struggles with Robert Spillane and other guys like that, I could see them calling on one of these guys. But again, my point, Daryl, and thank you again for your question on the Locked On Steelers hotline. I still think the Steelers' best move might not be a free agent. It might be going and trading for other guys, for someone else in the NFL. And this is where I don't try to act like I know everything most of the time, but this is where I try to further not act like I know everything. And when people say, "Oh, who should they trade for around the NFL?" Listen, there's times I get Myles Jack. Like right now, I've been saying Deron Payne would make a lot of sense. I'm not so sure who they would trade for right now, or what linebacker isn't getting along with their team well enough that maybe they become really good trade bait, for the Steelers to say, hey, here's Mason Rudolph and a pick, or hey, here's a pick, or something to make that happen. But I would not rule out the linebacker position being somewhere that they trade to get help in, but just maybe not trade a whole lot or spend a whole lot on that player unless, Devin Bush or Myles Jack go down to injury. Then I think they would treat that as a emergency situation that they would try to address. But in fact, I still think the answer would be CB1, offensive tackle, anywhere along and especially defensive line, especially the interior of the defensive line. Any of those positions would make sense to me to go get a move. They could also get a backup running back. Again, they got money. Omar Khan's got some tricks up his sleeve. We'll see what he does there. Thanks again to Daryl for the question on the Locked On Steelers hotline. And thank you, dear listeners and viewers, for sticking with us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Check out this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Also, read my work at SteelersNow.com. You're going to get things like my Chase Claypool interview that you saw just a snippet of, and I did a whole film breakdown that went along with my interview with Chase Claypool. Stuff you can only find at SteelersNow.com. Thanks again for checking us out here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers.